What's up, guys? Today, as part of our complication compilation, we are going over gastroparesis. Why are we going over gastroparesis specifically? Because it is an invisible enemy when it comes to managing diabetes, and I'm going to explain why. So first, what is gastroparesis? Gastroparesis comes from the Latin word Gastroparesis Diabeticorum, which basically means weak stomach of the diabetic. That's right, your stomach ends up weak. Specifically, what happens is that your vagus nerve, which helps control the muscles in your stomach and helps control the different valves on the bottom and on top of your stomach, gets messed up through neuropathy, through nerve damage. And what ends up happening is, since your vagus nerve sort of loses control, your stomach is closing when it should be open. It's not using the muscles right, so it's not getting fluids through, and so you end up having delayed stomach emptying. Your food's just not getting digested quick enough, not like a normal person would. And this can have huge implications, not just physically, but also on your blood sugar. And the worst part about gastroparesis is that it's unpredictable. It's very random. It's not the same every meal, every time. So your digestion ends up slower in a lot of cases and also predictable. Sometimes you'll digest just fine. Other times you will end up not digesting for hours and hours and then getting a big load of food coming in through your system 12 hours, maybe even days later. And for this reason, it can make blood sugar control very difficult. Let's say you have your insulin for your meal. You expect the meal to be digested and completely through in 5 hours. So you take your R insulin for your high protein, low carb meal, and it doesn't digest. What's going to happen is that your blood sugar is going to go low at first because it hasn't fully digested yet in time. And then 5 hours later, 12 hours later, maybe even the next day or overnight, your blood sugar is just going to randomly go up. And you're going to wake up with a high blood sugar like, well, how'd this happen? Could be gastroparesis. Turns out this kind of thing is actually pretty common for a lot of diabetics, especially those who've had it for more than 5 years or so. Because again, as I've mentioned previously, nerve damage is one of the earliest complications you get. And if you're having a symptom like that, where even if it's just your blood sugar, you might have no physical symptoms at all, you might not have anything other than your blood sugar going wrong, it could be gastroparesis. So to reiterate, if you find that you're dosing correctly, and sometimes your doses work perfectly, but other times you end up going low right after you eat and then going high many hours later, or after you eat your dinner, you go to bed, you wake up and your blood sugar is way higher than you expected, it could be gastroparesis. That could be exactly what it is. Now, for physical symptoms, you can have a more extreme case where you have bloating, belching, heartburn in your chest, constipation, and the worst case scenario is that you're vomiting and you can't even hold food down anymore. Fortunately, most people with gastroparesis don't have an extreme case like that. Most cases it's very mild, might just be your blood sugar going out of whack and nothing else. So let's say you think you might have gastroparesis, you have some of these issues. How do you test for it? Well, the doctors have a test for it that they use where they have you eat food containing a radioactive isotope that's completely non-poisonous, not going to hurt you. You eat it, and then they use x-rays to look at that isotope in their x-rays and see how quickly it gets through your digestive system. The issue here is that, like I said, gastroparesis is random. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. So the test could end up missing it because it's not testing for every meal every day. And these tests are pretty expensive. So if you want to get enough tests to really make sure, it'll cost you a lot of money. Your insurance probably won't even pay for it. And it'll cost you a lot of time as well. There actually is a couple easier ways to test for gastroparesis. At home, for example, let's say your issue is that you are looking good when you go to bed, but you wake up really high. What you could try is maybe one night, a few nights, you skip your meal and you skip your insulin with that, your dinner. You skip your dinner and you just go to bed. You wake up, see if your blood sugar went up. If it doesn't, okay, good. Repeat it a few times. If you notice that sometimes when you do eat dinner, your blood sugar is high the next day, but every single time you don't eat dinner, it's fine the next day, that could be gastroparesis. Another more thorough examination One that is unfortunately not done by very many people at all is called the RR interval study. It's something that Dr. Bernstein invented himself. He had a paper from the 1980s going over it. The theory with the RR interval study is that your vagus nerve is part of your autonomic nervous system. And one other thing that your autonomic nervous system controls is your heartbeat. For most normal people, when they breathe in, when they inhale, their heartbeat goes up a little bit. And when they exhale, it slows down a little bit. So, through just measuring your heartbeat, measuring through deep breaths in and out, you can actually see how well your vagus nerve is doing. Because if your heartbeat isn't changing at all when you inhale versus when you exhale, that could mean that there is autonomic dysfunction and thus vagus nerve damage and thus gastroparesis. How do you test this? Well, what you use is an EKG. Every clinic has one. They're very cheap to use. You don't even have to get a doctor to do it. You can just get one of the medical practitioners or a nurse could do it for you. It's very simple. What you'd have them do is you'd have them hook you up to this EKG, go to lead 2, and then just for a minute, you only need to test this for a minute, have you breathe in very deeply for 5 seconds, slowly, deeply, you won't be breathing the whole time, and then breathe out for another 5 seconds, very slowly, very deeply. You want to be breathing in the whole time, get as much as you can, and breathing out the whole time, getting as much out as you can. And you do this, breathing in and out every 5 seconds for a whole minute. And then once you have that EKG, what you do is you compare the 5 seconds of breathing in versus all the 5 seconds of breathing out. And the way you do that is for the inhales, you find the smallest gap between the peaks, and you measure that distance. And you do that for every single 5 seconds of the inhales. And for the exhales, you do the longest gap between 2 peaks. You measure those out. And then you combine the measurements, total them up for the inhales, and total up the measurements for the exhales. And then what you do is you divide the exhales from the inhales. You should end up with a number at least over 1. And let's say the number ends up being 1.4 or 1.5. That means your inhales are 40%, 50% faster than your exhales. That is a normal level. That's where you should be. Let's say it's lower than that, though. Let's say you're at 1.25. That means you probably have gastroparesis, because that's abnormally low. Let's say you're even lower than that. For example, in Dr. Bernstein's study where he goes over this, he had an example that was 1.07. The numbers, the peaks between the exhales and the inhales were virtually identical. In this case, you probably have severe gastroparesis, and you gotta do a lot more to manage it and get through it. Now, let's say you want to do this RR interval study, you go to the clinic, turns out most of them don't do it, they might not even know it exists, and they might say no to you. They might say, I've never even heard of it, I'm not gonna do it. Fortunately, there is another way. You can actually do it at home. You can get a EKG reader off of Amazon. I've used the Cardia Mobile 6 lead. Here it is. And you can actually measure EKG and do the timing and do the breathing in and out. Just do the calculations yourself, because the calculations are fairly simple and the process is fairly simple. Now, I recommend doing it in a professional setting with an actual medical professional, because then your results are going to be more clear-cut. They're going to be something that you can really show to a doctor. You can't just show them this calculation you made. But it can still work. It's still a lot better than nothing. And these EKGs actually can be pretty accurate. I did it myself with a mobile EKG reader. It was a little expensive, probably about $150, but I just returned it after I was done with it. What I found was that I was actually very good on my nervous system. Now, keep in mind, I may have had gastroparesis before, and after years and years of normal blood sugar, I've healed it. But when I checked it, I was at about 60% faster inhaling than exhaling, so that's a very good sign. Now, if your RR interval ends up looking very good, but you still suspect you might have delayed stomach emptying, you might still have it. It can be brought on through other causes as well. But what the RR interval study does is it measures for that main reason, that nerve damage that usually is a cause of gastroparesis in diabetics. So let's say you've done your calculations. You find out your R interval is out of whack. What do you do next? Well, there are a few solutions to help stimulate stomach emptying, to help make digestion easier. And you can implement a whole combination of these different things in your regimen. For the medication, you have to ask your doctor, obviously. But you can implement multiple techniques that I'm about to give you, and there's a lot more. I'm not even giving you everything here. And that way, that'll help you deal with your gastric emptying. That'll help you keep your blood sugar flatter and not rise long after meals. And over time, it's not going to cure these medications, all that, but normal blood sugars that you get from dealing with the symptoms will. Let's go over medications first. When we talk about medications, we want to stick with liquids and chewable tablets. The pills that you just swallow obviously aren't going to digest very fast, just like the rest of your food. You need something that you can chew until it's a powder or a liquid that's going to digest very fast. Anyways, a few medications you could try out. Again, ask your doctor. Some of these you don't have to. Some of these you can just get at a health store, but you should probably ask your doctor. Is Cisapride Suspension, which helps facilitate stomach emptying. Domperidone is another one. I don't think you can buy it in US, but you can get it in Canada, for example. Metoclopramide Syrup is another one you could try. Apparently it's very good for facilitating stomach emptying. And there's also different digestive enzymes you can buy from health food stores and other places that could help aid you in digestion and make things go a lot quicker. Other than medications, there's also exercises and massages you can do. You could, right after you eat, take a very brisk walk. Taking this walk, what it will do is help get the muscles activated all of your body and perhaps help stimulate stomach emptying. Another idea is to, when you eat, immediately after you eat, same thing in the brisk walk, is just suck in your stomach as much as you can and blow it back out as much as you can. And do this many times. And doing that muscle movement can help sort of work that food through your system and through your stomach and digest it much faster. And one more thing you can try is chewing gum. If you chew gum an hour before, that saliva that you create from it is producing enzymes that can help you digest the food that you're about to eat. So give that a try as well. Obviously, use sugar-free gum. Now, you can also sort of modify your meals a little bit and change what you eat slightly in order to help with your digestion. One way is to drink a lot of water before you eat, and when you eat, you want to chew very slowly and chew very thoroughly, so that way it gets through there a lot faster. Another idea would be to reduce or even eliminate dietary fiber. It's not essential. I've went over this before, and the thing about fiber that it's actually common knowledge is that it slows down digestion. You don't want your digestion to slow down. It's already too slow. So cut that fiber out. That's also an option. Another idea is you need to have your meat. You need to have your protein. But what you can do is ground it up. Instead of having it whole. Instead of steak, have ground beef. Instead of chicken, have ground chicken. Same thing of veal and pork and all that other stuff. And you might want to just cut shellfish completely because apparently it digests a little slower. But if you ground up your meats, it's going to be easier to digest. You could also reduce your protein at supper because it turns out that dinner is usually when gastroparesis is the worst. And not only that, but you are usually sleeping throughout the night. And if you wake up the next day with a high blood sugar, that's harder to deal with than when you're awake. So what you can do is you can reduce the protein in your supper. And since you still need that protein, simply add that protein that you reduced from the supper to breakfast or lunch. And that way your supper is going to be much easier to deal with because it seems to be the case that for many people, it's the worst at dinner. Now, if that doesn't work for you, you can also try having smaller meals, more frequent small meals. Instead of 2 large meals, have 3 smaller meals. Instead of 3 meals, you can have 4 smaller meals, and so on. Smaller meals can help aid your digestion too, because it's not giving your body as much of a load to deal with at one time. Now, last but not least, and this is last resort, guys, you'll be miserable doing this, I'm sure, is whole liquid food. This was reserved for the people with the most extreme gastroparesis that literally cannot stomach anything else. Whole liquid food, like baby food, whole milk yogurt, ricotta cheese, and liquefied meals, is going to be your best bet to stop gastroparesis in its tracks because it's already liquefied, right? Other than changing your medications, changing what you eat, or doing special exercises, you can also simply change your insulin bolus regimen to match this slower digestion. I do this myself. A few ways to do this are, instead of taking just one bolus shot 45 minutes before you eat, you can instead take that bolus sooner, maybe right before you eat. Alternatively, you can split your bolus where you only take half of your dose before you eat, and then you take the other half maybe a few hours later. Another idea you could do is, although it's a bit more experimental, is use both NPH and R for your dose. Maybe just if you're taking 4 units of R, you can add 1 unit of NPH into that syringe carefully. There's a process to this. I'll talk about a link that will explain that in a minute. You do that, and that way your dose is going to last much longer. The only issue, of course, is that that's very experimental. You're not going to be sure how long it lasts. So be cautious with that, but it is an option and people do that. Now, suffice to say, it's a whole lot to handle. Gastroparesis is a big deal even if you only have the very mild symptoms of blood sugar fluctuations that are otherwise unexplained. Even so, it can still be tough to deal with. That said, you can actually avoid it entirely if you normalize your blood sugars early enough. And if you have it now and you're dealing with it, as long as you can find a way to normalize your blood sugars now, you can actually reverse that gastroparesis completely. All it takes is to regrow those nerves, and again, the right environment for that is normal, non-diet blood sugars, between 70 to 90, something in that range. In doing so, eventually you'll be able to repair your vagus nerve and thus repair your gastroparesis problems. And then after you do, your blood sugar management will be that much easier. That's all for now, guys. Be sure to keep taming that type 1. Be sure to keep those normal blood sugars so you can avoid these issues, or if you have them now, reverse them. And I hope this video helped you out a lot in figuring out what gastroparesis is and how to manage it, because this really is a problem a lot of diabetics have. It is relatively common, but most people don't realize they have it because they don't have any of the physical feeling symptoms. They notice their blood sugar's out of whack and they just have no idea why. Well, if you have some of the signs that I talked about, it could be gastroparesis, and maybe you can implement some of these measures I talked about here in order to manage it, and it could help you out a lot. Last but not least, fellas, I'm giving a general explanation of gastroparesis, but there's more to the story. There's more details you can find, and I'm going to have a link below this video where it's going to go to Dr. Bernstein's book website, where he describes all the stuff I'm talking about and a lot more. He talks to you about more medicines, he talks to you about more solutions. So be sure to check out that link below, especially if you want to get more info, and also include a link that describes the R interval study. Next, we'll be going over retinopathy, blindness, another very common diabetic complication that you might have already heard about. You keep it easy, everyone. Keep taming that type 1, keep finding that normal blood sugars, and hopefully together we can avoid complications and reverse the ones we already have.